Okay, I think you'll find this quite interesting. We're going to talk about the Scottish Celtic people, the Picts, people of Ireland, the people of Anatolia, ancient Proto Indo Europeans, and their influence on that and the world. And I'll try to get it together a little bit into one, centering a little bit more on Western Europe. And what we see is depictions of Western Europeans over time. And if we looked at from the far left, you'd see somebody would be very much like Bronneman and or Cheddarman type. And no, he wouldn't have been as dark as they did that one depiction. It's been debunked. But somebody who could have had burgundy hair and so on. And the women just after it here with a blonde-haired child, kind of giving you that concept that that's already going on. And it's indeed been found that the light hair gene goes back 600,000 years, and a rough estimate on when it would have been in genetics by them seeing it in its placement along the genetic line. And it also seemed to be a blanket across what's known as the known world at 60,000 years. And that's again a projection, but they can look at genetics and see where things are placed and changing over time. And so that idea that they give that everybody came from one blue-eyed, everybody that has blue eyes came from one blue-eyed person that lived up near the Black Sea region at about 6800 BC has somewhat truth to it. But that man had a father, and he had brothers too, and uncles and great-grandfathers that probably had that blue-eyed gene for long, long before it. It's just one of those attachment type things to where, 6 degrees of separation. And I haven't done a video on this yet, but there's a guy that can show you that anybody in Britain goes back to certain kings and stuff if you go back certain lineages just over time, and time and probability that you'd be related to him, but distantly somewhat or not, regardless. But somewhere's third cousin equals the same as someone, and they married his sister. Well, that's that dude there, and da 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 up his tree, and he becomes the Earl of what the hell, you know. But that's long and drawn out, and it's not like we was kings or anything like that. But when looking at this type thing, you can see she's still looking at somewhat Eskimo-ish type of look. And then just after that, you see somebody who looks very Legolas-ish, but he has more animal skins. And of course, she was wearing animal skins too, but a double set and turned inside out. And this would have been coming out of the last ice age. And of course, LeBron and things that go before that, they show they have blue eyes. He has like a lion pelt here around his waist, and to the regular look of someone's eye, you might think that's legs, but he actually has pants on, and they have find remnants of people of making. He actually split-legged pants and everything at this time, boots and so on. Boots on the one behind him, and if you look, they've got him looking like, I don't know where the wild things are, whatever. He's wearing a wolf outfit or something along that, and this shows some of the animalistic and animistic type religion and nature that people still had at this time, and shamanistic things that I've shown in some of my videos that people are doing. The guy after it looks like Jesus or whatever would have been something around your Celtic, Pictish type people here that they're trying to depict, and then it goes from there. There's a red-headed guy in between, and each one of these really depicts an era or an epoch of time. And we get up to the Greek statesman, and of course he's not wearing armor, but this guy's wearing a chest piece already at this time, whether that's probably leather or something, or maybe even woven extra fabric and so on, as it gets better over time, as we've seen. But then we got Tacitus, and then Agricola, whose brother we really like, Coca-Cola, just kidding, and Hadrian for the wall, and so on. But when we think about Britain and everything, we always think about King Arthur, and he must have been way past anybody on this scale here to the left, and because of his armor and the way that he looks. But we're glorifying a point in time right there, and then part of the Crusades and situation that goes along with it. But in truth or reality, when it goes back to the Lady of the Lake and so on like that, that actually goes back to somewhere right around in here in the Bronze Age era and coming out of it. And whenever you pull a sword from a stone, I've said before a few times in my videos that that actually is people being able to smelt and do things. For there's this stone, you can get some pile of rocks and you can turn it into a stone. And that the original concept that goes with that didn't necessarily go with a sword that was stuck into a stone that nobody could pull out, and then some kid yanked it out real easy one day and stuff. That's a secondary concept, a rebirth and a retelling with a bunch of adding on to it that has to do with the start of the Crusades. And I'll do one on Crusades here, you know, whatever. And also Robin Hood, that we think of is much later off this wall and everything that's here. But I'll tell you that there was a Robin Hood type figure that was back in about this area. Maybe the guy hiding in the background with the reddish hair and the headband looks a little Jesus-ish. But there were others, and then of course the time that we know of in Sherwood Forest and everything, and God, I hope this doesn't turn off, that we know about that. It's of course a later telling of things that happened at that time, but it's weird. But Robin Hood, I've got this guy that I've looked at his stuff, he does all these dissertations about it because it was his whole PhD and everything out on it, and he explains it out pretty well. And about how that there's this folklore that builds up, and then this one guy gets it attached to him after the fact, and so on. But that's neither here nor there. But you know, that's just a little flavor, I guess. Because what we're going to look at is the ancient Picts, what's called the Gauls, the Scots, exploring their mysterious and sometimes mythical origins. Now, when the tribe of the Cadi arrived in Scotland in the beginning of the Christian era and became the embryonic clan called Keith, which is interesting, they assimilated with the people known to us by their Roman name, the Picts. And I tell you that that's actually where we kind of get picture from, and you might understand it again here just shortly. They, however, knew themselves by another name. They called it the Celti or the Celti, and we're aware of the fact that from written work of the Roman scribes, who quite naturally filled in details of the unknown that they were expected to do, and quite often it worked off of some type of hearsay and so on, and you can tell that they're exaggerated tales back then quite often. And of course, anybody who isn't speaking Greek is a barbarian, but also anybody who doesn't shave their face back then, as we look back up at this picture, all these guys are a bearded people, so they're a barbarian people, because these people right here called anybody who didn't shave their chins and shave and everything barbarians too. It has to do with barbers and stuff, like Barbarossa, who's Redbeard and things. But you notice the Greeks, the only ones that have the beard are the ancient gods and then philosophers and so on like that, right? So where the Picts came from and who they were, other than the carvers of often monoliths, and the speakers, readers, and writers of a script were still yet to decipher. Understand and know remains and mysterious to the masses still to this day, but I'm going to try to shed some light on it. For this is one of the earliest depictions of them here, and so this is bringing horses, and because it's got a long wavy mane instead of the chopped off mane of the regular type, you can tell this is definitely on the domesticated version of it. There's a couple oddities in this though. Shows a full bridle and bit, which is pretty neat at the time, and just the most makeshift of saddles, which apparently is cinched around him here. I would think that you're trying to say it's a male horse. And the man that's here is bald-headed and has that chin beard thing, and it almost looks like Sumerian priest or whatever like that, if you will. But also it kind of looks gnomish, which is kind of interesting. Just a side note, that gnome that we talk about or whatever could be something very much like this, because always they draw the gnome and they've got that little pointy cap and stuff. You've seen gnome in the commercials and stuff, and the little kids movies and stuff that they've had over them, and Gnomeo and whatever, and they've got that Phrygian and pointy cap, don't they? So whenever I say a lot of this is in your face all the time and people don't know it. And what is gnome? Well, in Egypt, a gnome was a different area of settlement, of growth. Oh, okay. Well, these gnomes changed their settlement a place a time or two. One of the oddities I see is that he's sitting in the middle of the horse. He's not even actually sitting up on the horse's back. It was a little oddly drawn. By the same time, it's a pretty damn good horse, and his hoofs and everything look real good. Shows the forelock areas and so on. It's with it. He is wearing boots and pants, boots and pants and boots and pants. Bearded Pictish warrior from the Bullion Stone, Angus, now in the National Museum of Scotland. So let's talk about origins and so on. The descendants of a goddess. They themselves believed that they were descendants of the goddess Bridget, considered to be sacred and benevolent across the desperate communities of the Celtic world. And we, from that, Bridget, get the British name, actually, eventually. And also we get the name, supposedly, a bridge of people coming across water or rivers, and bridge, and what bridges is in linguistics, and it's said. And then also at the same time we get the word caught in with military and stanza points, which might show some conspicuous connection too, of brigadier, as in brigadier general, and that high of a rank that we've given to this. But Kenneth MacAlpin, considered to be Scotland's first king, was a descendant through his mother, as all Pictish kings were, as a consequence of the material system of inheritance. So there's matrilineal lines that they go off of, and quite a few people do, but we've seen that in an ideal that goes into Amazons and things like that here recently. Hey, have you checked your IQ lately? Pagan. And there's other stories about picking apart the Picts, the value of Aberdeen's newest discovery. And yeah, it's kind of neat, and I'll probably do a video about that. Aberdeen, like Katniss Aberdeen? That's, well, okay, close enough. 3,000-year-old broken weapons found in Scotland Loch reveal ancient ritual offering to the gods. I'm all over it. Back to our story, though. To the Gaelic speakers who had arrived in Ireland, the Picts of what they called Alba, Scotland, were known as the Cruithne, which translates into English as wheat growers, so basically farmers. And that name, too, was to be found for use in Ireland at that time to describe non-Gauls. So conspicuously, that just pegs right to it. But also, it looks like these are these first wave of Proto-Indo-European farmers who had developed it and coming back in and meeting with basically the same somewhat people, but they were still hunter-gatherers primarily at the time. Their land was known as Kurgan Tuatha, and Tuatha has a lot to do with other things like Tuatha Danaan, and it has a sacred meaning to it too. The Cruithne had populated Ireland before the arrival in Hibernia of the Gauls from Iberia, so what we call Spain today. Here's a pretty revealing picture here of a Pict, and so where do we get the idea of picture from and everything? Well, no, they were not great artists or anything, except for what you would call their tattoos. And we've talked about Scythians and the Amazonians and having the tattoo, and how they have this female-geared matriarchy that passes on down versus what we do today with a male, but it's really pretty much the same thing. And depictions and stories from back then. And oddly enough, in this depiction, you can see something that depicts a womb type of area, but then a giant sun symbol seems to be working off the belly button, right? And then a meteor, and then something that looks like ice, so fire and ice, and there's a crescent moon involved with it, some storm clouds, lightning type effects, Down in the legs seems to be like plating, drawing, and pictures. And not sure if they were always drawn and always tattooed up this much. But other interesting effects is her held spear is a trident, and it has 2 feathers attached to it. And oh, I missed it showing it to you, but way up there in the second guy over, well, the first one past the girl that looked like an Eskimo wearing stuff, 2 feathers. And also at that time, and that lineage in time, I've shown you a few people that have this 2 feather hookup. And it goes all the way down to Egypt with the 2 feather hookup and everything. And what's that got to do with anything? Well, it's even in the Americas, believe it or not, in certain Indian tribes with whenever they become a brave and so on. And in some ways, it almost means the same situation, but it's denoting who you are and stuff, and it's giving an idea. But it wouldn't be more of a brave. It's more of a prince or somebody who has some type of nobility, or they're the one who is going to be the representative. They're the leader of said group and so on like that. Other interesting note is that even at that time she had a scimitar, a Scythian, a scythe blade, right? And something that we definitely think of later is something that comes along with Turkish and Arabic people, and we get that grained into us whenever we see Indiana Jones and they have that big wide blade that comes at him and he just goes all hell and shoots him and stuff, which supposedly is supposed to be improvised. Now, she holds a handful of weapons too, but there's other things about her tattoos, but I must go on. But you can see her golden blonde hair, and huge, and it goes down to her waist. And indeed, they didn't cut their hair or do whatever with it, and the men had long hair too. And so a lot of people called them wild and all this type of stuff, but just like what you would see with hippies and things like that, that they were growing out their hair. It wasn't a cropped up thing. But a lot of them would cut off their hair, and they cut off their hair for certain ceremonies and certain things, especially having to do with marriage and stuff like that. And we can even see that reflected in the Bible. Also like to mention they are even saying, even at this time, there are those castles with those top aids on them and everything. And of course you see the notches there, and I think we'll catch up on that later here and stuff. So that's a version called the Pict woman, a member of the ancient Celtic people from Scotland. And it's from Debry's engraving, The True Picture of a Woman Pict. And it was from 1588, from tellings and stories and things like that. Now, accounts in the book of Lagoon, and told also by Strabo. And Lagoon, well, in a French linguistics, Proto-European situation, that's the cane. Who's cane? Well, cane can be a grain and a stem and something like hemp or papyrus, and that's interesting. But cane also is known in the Bible, but keep that in mind as we continue. It is written that from Noah came Japheth, and then father after son, Phaltech, Mith, Buain, Agnoin, Partilian, Luctai, Singe, and Cruithne. And yeah, I'm going to tear these names up. And Cruithne, who himself produced the 7 sacred sons, Kate, C, Kirig, Fib, Fidak, Fotla, and Fortran. And people have said that from that becomes fortress or fort. But Kate, and we know the name of Kate, but not C-A-I-T, and it's in linguistics and everything. And when you see things written sometimes in other people's language, you can't quite get the idea. But Kate, as an English name, still stems from way back at times like this. And the name C, of course. But each of those sons, though, whom were kings of the 7 provinces or kingdoms of Tuatha, like as in Tuatha and Danaan. Well, there's what's her name? Yep, Jamie Lee Curtis. Greek historian Strabo, though, to connect a few things here for you and show you that they were writing about these people at this time. was writing in the 1st century AD, asserted that the Picts are the Celts, which there is a form of T and D as far as what making the duh or tuh sound, so Addis can be Addis. Regardless, Celts had been displaced to Scotland from the Celtic lands of Gaul. And, well, we think of Gaul as being right over there, but nay, it's talking about it actually seeming to be referring to him at the time of being somewhere else, which he called Galati, so Galatians. In fact, there's a Bible chapter named after such, and that they were displaced by the Samaritans. And again, that name is very prominent in the Bible, in the Good Samaritan, but it also has something to do with Sumerians and Sumerians. But I digress. Let's continue. Those Samaritans, whose soldiers had invaded from beyond the river Rhine and from the mountains that are now called part of Switzerland, which sounds kind of odd whenever you read it, because we know where the Samaritans are supposed to be. And so, doggone, aren't those crazy Caucasians getting around in days? Especially once they had something going on like horses. A lot more reliable than a donkey or something like that. Right? So Switzerland, so he like come through the Alps in that type of situation, man? Well, in fact, he tells the reader that they had arrived in Celte Galtia from Asia Minor. From Asia Minor, where they had been known as the Chaldees, or Galat from Galatia. And so now we find that Galatia, which has been shown, and I showed on a couple of older things, that when people say Galatia, they think it's way over here near Spain and up towards Britain and everything, and it's like, no, that's what they like to show about it. But how about this map and this map that show way over here, and how about this one where they're just called right there off Sea of Galilee and everything, right there above it, all in that area. That's where the name is. Anyhow, but known as the Chaldees, the area that was formerly the lands upon which the Hittites had built their capital of Hattusha. And we've done one or two recently about the Hittites. There's a real good one that Robert Sepper put out, but I sure could add some little more to it. He always liked to leave it a little bit live and wide open. Well, are they the same people as the Chaldeans who migrated from neighboring Sumer north towards Anatolia, as it had said that they had done after the great flood? If we look at this castle top that we're looking at, just the top of here, and I was to tell you that was sometime from the Middle Ages, and it was in Spain, right? And the cannonade, and how they could shoot through the gaps of it, and how it's like 2 stories tall and then has a 3rd story on it. It's pretty neat, but no. And it's not from 1300 AD, but it's from about 1300 BC, and it's a reconstructed city wall of Hattusha in Turkey from the Hittites. And it's talk about run-ins with Senusret of Egypt and everything, but it's the one guy that's kind of left out. But the Hattusians are kind of in the middle of everything, and at the top are kind of in that area right off the Caucasus Mountains and in Anatolia, that's kind of the go-between between a lot of people, except for what the Phoenicians had going on, because once you have that all broken up to where they can go all through the Mediterranean that way instead of around through different people, then you no longer have middlemen in any way, shape, or form. But that's another topic. So they have holy ancestors. Well, the Gauls themselves recorded their descent through time in the what's called the Liber Gabala. Written in the 11th century AD, it claimed that their ancestor was a Scythian king, Phineas Farsade, also a descendant of Japheth, and one of the 72 chiefs who began the construction of the ill-fated Tower of Babel. So they have a definite connection to it. In fact, there's a video I've done about the Scottish Declaration of Independence, and in there it describes the same situation in what they still have today. And that's kind of done on animal skin and stuff and everything, but that type of parchment or vellum. His son Nel wed the Egyptian princess Scotia, and from that union came the son Godelglas, from whom came the Gaelic culture and language, one of the original 72 tongues that emerged following the curse on the 72 chieftains intent on building a tower to talk to God. Now, the odd thing here is that we know that that's in Samaria and a ziggurat situation, and we get that Bible story from them. And really looking into it, you find that it was one that they never quite got built, and it got inundated with water to where it ruined it, to where they couldn't finish it off. It would fall in on itself, and then they stripped it pretty much. And so I've even seen a video where they've actually found where it is, and they find some of the bricks. Some of them even have the blue still, glazed into them that would have been part of it going around, and they show a video part of it. I did a video part of it. I don't know, it may have gotten flagged and I took it off eventually, but it's way back 3 years ago or so. Regardless of that, though, it's a 72 idea, and that's a symbolic number, and it goes with the Sumerian sixes too. But people, believe it or not, if you're going by sixes and 6, 10, 60, and 6 times 2 is 12, and 60, and if I had 5 foot, I'm 60, and if I'm 6, I'm 72. Right? But Sumerian doesn't totally connect up to Proto-Indo-European languages, just like the Basque doesn't totally hook up to Proto-Indo-European languages, but all others do, all the way from Indian Sanskrit and the languages all the way up from near China, all the way across, including Russian dialects all the way through, all the way around the Mediterranean and all the way over to where we're talking about in Ireland and such. But were they necessarily there all the time? And who were the people that were over in the Anatolian area and so on? Well, I've shown you a lot of Egyptian stuff that shows you these blue-eyed and blonde-haired, red-haired mummies, even pre-dynastic Gibelline mummy called Ginger and so on, and the Sumerian statues that showed blue eyes with them, and it just keeps going with this group of people that had fair hair, and Canaanite burials that they have, that people have blonde hair and they're still shown it or whatever, and it's not something that changed over time. There's their hair, because the one next to him's got some brownish black hair, and things aren't changing right there next to each other. It's the same, just like the Egyptian necropolis that they found, where there's redheads in one area, blondes in another, brunettes, browns, and blacks in another, and different color of hair in different places. Those amazing Caucasians, and it's like, doesn't look like they're putting them together in families like we do, but in hair groups due to some of their gods. Like Seti was known to have been Seth, known to have been a redhead. And of course, we have Seth in the Bible, not Cain like we referred to just earlier, but Seth, and that correlates to Seti. And of course, there's Egyptian kings of Seti, and Ramses also is known to have been redheads and so on. And it seems to be by the color of their hair, they were basically dedicated one way or another, although they had a pantheon of gods. But let's continue. Talk about the 72 different languages, but if we track it back at one point here, maybe not that it broke into 72, for it only adds up to like 34 or something, and that's with even the slight differences. all the way from Ireland to even India. But what does change is that if you draw it back in time enough, pretty much everybody spoke a language that everybody could understand at this point. And that might have been more symbolic in trying to attach it to a tower that we've got buildings all around the world today that are much taller than that. It wasn't worried about they were going to build a tower to God. You know, in some of those stories, God was in a city in the clouds. An idea, you know, that's where heaven was. We don't run into them with airplanes and stuff and everything. And it's a city of lapis lazuli and got pearl gates and stuff on it. And what's that got to do? Well, that's the Sumerian story also, you know. But had the floor that looked like the cosmos. Well, actually, it almost sounds like you could see through the floor and you could see into space. But that's another thing. Let's keep that in mind as we talk more about Skada and Akhenaten's daughter, known as Skadia. Scotia means little flower. So this Nell and Goidelglas. Now, in some of the stories, she just married Goidelglas. In other stories, it seems like that pinpoints it down to that weird thing, and it really was her son, but almost like there seems to be two Nimrods. He was born and he was born again, but you have later names of them. You know, interesting fact to throw in here, in Egypt and all these places, in Nechanebo II, they don't put a 2 on it. He's just Nechanebo, but we know from before it they had a Nechanebo, so that makes him the second, and this is the third. In fact, they've had to change a few of them because they find somebody named before. There's still a few Egyptian people, even they don't, you know, he's beloved of this guy. Well, who the hell is he? But let's just continue. Nell and Scotia spent their time in Egypt before they left for Spain, leaving at the same time that the Hebrews had departed, roughly the time of the Hyksos expulsion and everything. But wherever they left to, they brought with them the accumulated knowledge of that civilization. Well, it seems like that was slightly a different time, maybe. For the time of Akhenaten there, it's, 18th dynasty, and we have King Tut happens right after it. But Akhenaten got almost destroyed off the records, and perhaps it's more of an exile type situation, or wanting to leave and to continue somewhat that sun worshipping monotheism, and we will see that reflected somewhat. So wherever they left to, they brought with them the accumulated knowledge of that civilization. Here's a painting that's showing a ancient boat, and a bunch of people with funny hats on. The helmets, to me, always, whenever I look at this picture, and some of them like them, are a little too big and bobble-headed. It reminds me of in Labyrinth, when they run into the people at the very end of it, and they get the spike balls running down through there, and they're all like giggly running around because it's out of proportion somewhat. But here are priests and stuff coming with that lady who seems to be red-headed and wearing a type of headdress with her, and there are others with her too, and children, right? And that's supposed to be Scotia and Gaelglas, and this was back in the 15th century in Skada Chronicon. So this is a telling of the Scottish. And let's make another connection to a biblical name and a biblical people. The Hebrew Bible, or Old Testament, is of course where we first read of the Tower of Babel and Japheth, as well as his second-born son Magog. Now, from the Romano-Jewish historian of the very first century A.D., known as Titus Flavius Josephus, or born Yusef ben Mattathiel, we learn that the Scythians are descended from Magog, and he talks about that clearly. But at that time, in the Greeks and everything, which he's hooked up with Romans, they have different names. There's the Sarmatians or Samaritans, and there's Scythians, the Far Eastern, and a few different names that are given across there for what ultimately is just one group of people. In essence, Could it be that from the firstborn son of Japheth came the Picts in a wave, and from the secondborn and later came the Gauls? The biblical tribe of Dan has often also been connected with the story of Ireland, particularly the one of the founding people of that land, Tuatha de Danaan. And I've shown a video about this. In fact, I've done two of them, and a third one actually that shows part of Robert Seffer's telling of this same Scotia tale in it. And it shows you where her burial is and so on like that. How much time do we got? We're still fairly good. So, Tuatha Danaan, which can translate roughly as tribe of Dan or the people of Dan, and we know the Danube and the Danes, and Denmark, and people have even connected Danzig with it, and water people, and the Phoenicians themselves in some way. But here's a neat telling, because it is said that in some tellings that Tuatha Danaan came on a fiery horse. Other ones tell it's a unicorn, and that hair of fire in all this situation. Well, if we look at this horse, you can see the wrapping of the war horse that's on it, and it kind of looks like flames at the bottom of it, and that could be a symbol. And with that red, she's riding on it, but she has flame red hair, like Inanna is told to be in a lot of her stories and things. But they're say it come on white horses, and it's very important they come on white horses, and it's shown in most of the pictures as white horses. And then later we see stories of in the Bible of Jesus coming back on a white horse. He rode in on a donkey, and everybody rode donkeys, but these horse people become the important thing that happens out of that group. So what is this? Well, they're always shown as pretty much blondes across the group, except for this one, but that one too has that conical witch Phrygian cap. This one has a snake on the head symbology, but they said that she, stories all connected with the unicorns and everything too. Well, let's just look at this. There, you see this cowling that's on these horses. That's a face cowling, a protection for their face, right? And so that looks like we've seen war horses with stuff like that before. But what is that? It's a unicorn. And so it's made into a unicorn idea. Well, that's kind of neat. We know the Bible unicorn is really a one-horned rhino, and you can't tame it, and it took a virgin to do this, that, and the other. Well, here it comes in on this story of this special Inanna, the da-da-da, and she's not only the Queen of Beauty and Love, but she's also a huntress, right? Just like Diana, Inanna, Ishtar, Ishtara, riders in the Sidhe. The Dan Hebrews, who occupied a coastal territory in ancient Israel, which we'll call Canaanites or Phoenicians, were mariners and merchants. They were also of the lands of Crete and from parts of Greece, like Mycenaeans and stuff, from where they left at the time of a famine and the schism within the house of David that saw the 10 northern tribes seceding over the ascension to the throne of Solomon's son, Rehoboam. Before reconciliation and the reunification of the kingdoms of Judah and Israel, and these were concurrent events. According to history from the Greek islands, they arrived in Denmark, giving that place its name. Interestingly, the people of the rest of Scandinavian began at Denmark, it's said, for obvious geographic reasons. Therefore, it would have been plausible for the Tuatha De Danaan to have arrived in Ireland from the north, as the Irish chronicles inform us. Scotland too is to the north of Ireland, and so to have said that it came back from that would have fit with their story quite well, according to the ancient myths of Ireland, recording at different times and different languages, and by different peoples, so kind of corroborated. Upon the arrival of the Gauls on the island, Ireland was inhabited by a people who were known to history as the Tuatha Danaan. According to legend, the first guile ashore was met by three high kings. We three kings. They came from the east. Of the Tuatha Danaan, Maccool, Mackecht, and Macgreen, accompanied by their queens. And just a picture here of someone riding into that. Redheaded, though. This is Oisin and Nam traveling to Tir na Nog, land of the young, land of Nod. Not the old land, the newer land. For once a land got used up because everybody was cramped in it at the end of the last ice age, and the sacred forest started going away, and the ice age and ice shelf went away, a lot more people migrated back up into an area of more greenness. The story continues that a deal was struck, and the Gauls agreed that they would wait on aboard their ships anchored offshore. In the meantime, one of the queens conjured a tempest with the intention of scattering the invading fleet. However, it abated with the magical words of a Gaelic poet, or a bard. In the end, the surviving Gauls, or Milesians, as they were known to the Tuatha De Danaan and the chroniclers of the time, landed and agreed that Ireland should be split between them, and the Gauls taking the ground of the island and the Tuatha De Danaan inheriting the underground where they could continue to live as the fairy people of fable. And then we wonder if fair-skinned, fair-haired had anything to do with the idea of fairy being very colorful, if that had to do anything with tattoos, which we've seen the Amazonian woman have and such. And wings might have been a depiction and a religion they brought with them of the angel concept that we see from there all the way through Samaria, Inanna with the wings that are on her, and everywhere else in this queen bee almost situation. But that's got a lot to do with it too. Witchcraft in Scotland, and then a story here about Kenneth MacAlpin, king of the Picts, a legendary founder of Scotia. Ooh, well, I'm going to have to be all about that. Also, Nova Scotia, and people have sometimes never made the connection to easy linguistics. Nova being no or new, and so New Scotland. Maybe that shows more connections to the Vikings than people want to give credit to, and these Danes and Denmark and Finland and Scandinavians. Although there were people there before, there easily came a people again. The coming sons of Myled, the Danaan, pre-Celtic fairy people, were overthrown by invading Milesians, and who they are. And we're going to cut it off right here. Go in the top left-hand corner, and that'll go to part 2. It's going to be a few more minutes to get to the rest of it, although it'll be shorter than the second part. We'll see you there. Top left-hand corner, part 2.